That story gives me hope. It's a long way from the way my journey started. Oh, sorry. Can you hear me now? Okay, I just said that story gives me so much hope. It's a long way from the way it was when I was 17, as you'll hear. Coming out is a lifelong process. So here I stand, doing it once more. I would wish that one day coming out would not be necessary, but until we learn not to make assumptions that people are heterosexual, cisgender, or without any other invisible difference, those of us who don't fit societal norms will need to come out. I don't see that day coming very soon. And so we have National Coming Out Day to remind us that we're not all the same, to celebrate those who have come out and thereby made it easier for others to do so, to encourage and support those who have not been able to come out, and to lift up all our allies for creating spaces where coming out is safe. Many of you are such allies. This church is one, and so is the Unitarian Universalist denomination. And I want to thank you and to explore how my coming out was supported by this congregation and in turn supported this congregation's coming out. My story is a long one because I'm an old woman. I was a girl who wanted to be a boy, a teenager who had crushes on girlfriends and female teachers, and a college student who was outed by someone while I was still coming out to myself. Threatened by the Dean of Women with expulsion unless I stayed away from my girlfriend and began counseling, I felt shame, not pride, in my sexual identity. This was the late 50s, when homosexuality was mostly considered a sin, a mental illness, and sometimes a crime. I spent the next 15 years trying to get fixed. I went from counseling to psychoanalysis, where I was told there was no such thing as a lesbian, and I was encouraged to be feminine. Eventually, I married and had children. My husband was a traditional male. I was trying to be traditionally female while also being a PhD student and an assistant instructor at the university. Not trying real well, I guess, without any help from my husband. He had affairs. We separated in 1972. Shortly thereafter, I joined a UU consciousness raising group, CR, we called those, and figured out that I was a feminist, probably always had been, and wouldn't be happy married to anyone who wasn't. Before this, the riots at Stonewall in 1969 had begun the gay liberation movement, and attitudes toward homosexuality were changing. The feminist movement was very supportive of lesbianism. So after several years together, my CR group began to talk about lesbianism and helped me to begin to sort out the psychological abuse I had experienced. Then Carol came to live with us to help me with the children and the house. I didn't know that she was involved with a woman. Maybe I did subconsciously, but anyway, she came out to me early on, asking if I minded that her partners spend the night. When her relationship ended, Carol and I began to share our mutual experience as lesbians, comforting each other, trying to understand, and falling in love. On December 21st, 1975, Carol and I began our relationship, now nearly 47 years in duration. Then my coming out slowly began. Early on, we came out to the children. This was more confusing to our daughter than to our son, who was nearly instantly attached to Carol's leg. Our daughter, on the other hand, tended to see Carol as competition. We did lots of counseling. Even though we were not publicly out, in order to protect the children and to maintain custody of them, they nevertheless suffered at the hands of their classmates' homophobia. Carol was out to her family. Knowing mine believed that homosexuality was a sin, I took several years to tell them. But we went everywhere as a family and a couple, including all of our family events. And also, we went to the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship in Lawrence, where we were very accepted. And after we moved to Eau Claire in 1977, we came to this congregation and had the same experience. Although we never told everyone, although we told everyone with whom we became close and helped start lesbian or gay organizations here in Eau Claire, ran a lesbian hotline in our home, and were active in the Women's Center, these years were mostly closeted or semi-closeted, at least in my mind. We didn't say we were a couple, but we acted like a couple in every way except for overt displays of affection. We went to Minneapolis a lot for gay culture, dances, concerts, books, theater, etc. We were able to be completely out there, building our gay identities and growing proud of who we are. In the mid-'80s, after the children were out of the home, we began seriously coming out. I delivered a paper at a national conference called The Gay Family in Literature for Young People, and wrote a book about the lesbian author of Harriet the Spy, in which I argued that her sexual orientation affected her writing. In its preface, I came out. During this time, I was elected to a 3-year term on the board of this congregation to serve as president during the second year. In preparation, I attended Midwest Leadership School, where I was completely out and helped negotiate some tensions that were sparked by perceived homophobia. I also came out at Bryn Mawr at a conference on women in higher education administration. And next it was the chancellor, whom I was working for at the time, and his staff at UW Stout. In 1990, on our 15th anniversary, we had an illegal wedding in this church, which was packed. Our children were our attendants. It was wonderful. It was a high point in my life because I felt so affirmed. Affirmation by this congregation as a lesbian and a leader led me to seminary. There I was completely out also. Being so was clearly part of my spiritual journey. I could write a sermon about that, but let me just say this. Accepting and loving who you are and being able to share who you are is necessary to being fully alive, fully present, fully accepting, and fully loving. I came to realize this so deeply that when in 1999, in my interview to be minister here, I was asked how out I would be, I answered quickly, completely, and then explained that this was necessary, not only for me to feel whole, but also to make it feel safer for those attending to come out. Unless I tell people I'm gay, they're likely to assume I'm straight. This happens to me in the pool all the time. And coming out, therefore, difficult as it may be at times, is the only way to defeat heterosexism. In 1996, while I was in seminary, the Defense of Marriage Act, DOMA, passed, prohibiting on a federal level the right of same-sex couples to marry. Petitioning members of Congress to vote against, Carol and I began our work for marriage equality. I became the minister here in 1999 and continued the work for LGBTQ+ rights, increasingly with your support. In 2001, the Welcoming Congregation Committee began its work. We began with a survey of the congregation. The attitudes in general, not too surprisingly, were very positive toward lesbians and gay men. Within the context, though, of these positive, comfortable feelings, several interesting trends were evident. People were significantly more uncomfortable at the thought of learning that their best friend was a gay man or a lesbian than at any other question specifically about gay men and lesbians. The questions regarding attitudes toward bisexuals revealed a higher degree of discomfort than those toward lesbians and gay men. And those regarding attitudes toward transgender people revealed even more concern and discomfort. The Welcoming Congregation Committee offered the UUA Welcoming Congregation Workshop Series over the course of the 2002-2003 program year and during the 2003 Summer Forum. Based on the findings of the survey, the committee particularly included sessions on bisexuality and transgender issues. And the consensus of the attendees and the committee was that the process was worthwhile and informative. At the committee's suggestion, the congregation voted to change our congregational bylaws. Article 2, Purpose, to read, "The purpose of this organization shall be to pursue the study and to practice the principles of the liberal Unitarian Universalist faith, and to further individual freedom of belief, discipleship to advancing truth, democratic process in human relations, and allegiance to the cause of world community, undivided by nation, race, creed, gender expression, or affectional or sexual orientation." And I wrote our congregational welcome as it was read at the beginning of this service, somewhat revised, emphasizing all the human differences we hope to welcome and nourish. I also preach regularly on issues related to LGBTQ concerns. As far as I know, I was the only minister at that time in town of offering same-sex ceremonies of union, and I officiated at dozens of such ceremonies. I also officiated at several memorial services for gay men. I persuaded the local newspaper to accept a liberal clergy column in the Saturday religion section. Column space had historically been given disproportionately, almost entirely, to fundamentalist Christian ministers. I used my first column to advocate tolerance for diversity, and I continued with this theme in later columns. The Welcoming Congregation Committee recommended identifying ourselves on our brochure, adding a rainbow triangle to the wayside pulpit, and including in our newspaper advertisement at that time, providing non-denominational weddings and services of union, a welcoming congregation. This also began our participation in Pride celebrations. We hosted several Thanksgiving and wait a minute. We hosted services of Thanksgiving and celebration during Chippewa Valley Pride. At one time, some of you will remember, we were picketed by a conservative church from Augusta, but unfortunately they came at 9 o'clock instead of 10 o'clock. We several times hosted the World AIDS Day service. Members participated in the AIDS Walk. We began marking National Coming Out Day with Sunday services. When the Wisconsin State Legislature began to debate a Defense of Marriage Act in 2003, members of the UUC contributed to a half-page advertisement in the local newspaper objecting to the measure. When a local high school English teacher was threatened with dismissal because she showed pre- and post-operative head and shoulder photographs of a male to female transition, members of the UUC provided a show of support with letters to the editor of the local newspaper. In response, the paper published a column by the teacher in question, complete with photographs. The teacher was not dismissed, but she was reprimanded. On Valentine's Day, 2004, Carol and I applied for a marriage license at the county courthouse. And of course, we were refused on grounds that legally marriage is defined as between one man and one woman. Some of you were there. We got lots of press. In November 2006, the Wisconsin constitutional amendment banning gay marriage and civil unions was passed. This was a low point. Members of the UUC led the fight in western Wisconsin against the proposed amendment. Several meetings of Fair Wisconsin, the state organization working against this ban, were held here in our church. The congregation added its name to a petition signed by many churches opposing the amendment. A lawyer from our congregation, Dan Freund, of course, spoke against the ban to more than 40 organizations in the region. Many members canvassed neighborhoods, staffed phone banks, and entered data in the system. The amendment was defeated in our county, but passed in the state. On the positive side, our volunteers helped educate voters on the implications of the amendment. Then, on August, this is a long journey. Then on August 3rd, 2009, Carol and I were able to apply for a domestic partnership in Wisconsin. We were the first in line. As always, we got lots of press, and some of you were there. This status provided us with 43 of the 200 rights available to married couples of different sexes. It provided none of the 1,138 benefits, federal benefits for heterosexual couples. In July, members of the Wisconsin Family Action filed a suit declaring that domestic partnership was substantially marriage and therefore illegal under the constitutional ban. We were the plaintiffs in the ACLU suit. As always, you supported us. I retired in 2008. In June 2013, the Supreme Court struck down DOMA as unconstitutional. Many of the federal benefits became available to same-sex couples. So on our 38th anniversary, we got legally married in Minnesota. Having defeated the challenge to domestic partnerships, now the ACLU filed a new suit, Wolf versus Walker. On February 3rd, 2014, it was challenging the constitutional ban and also a little-known law called the Marriage Evasion Statute, which says that those who marry elsewhere in violation of Wisconsin law on marriage can be fined up to $10,000 and jailed for up to 9 months. We were the lead plaintiffs suing for relief from this marriage evasion statute because, as you know, we were married in Minnesota, but we live in Wisconsin where same-sex marriage was illegal. This suit was, of course, mostly for legal recognition of same-sex marriage. 7 other couples were part of the suit. On June 6, 2014, the district court in Madison ruled in our favor. The state immediately appealed to the 7th Circuit Court of Appeals, which on September 4th, in a unanimous decision, upheld the district court's decision. The struggle was over for the time being. Carol and my 40th anniversary party held in our social hall here in the summer of 2015 was a real celebration. As this recital of events reveals, as I was becoming more and more out, our church was also. For a while, we were known as the gay church. Perhaps we still are. There was initially some consternation about this, but gradually I think we became less concerned if not proud, of this label. The work of coming out and of supporting LGBTQ+ rights gradually became integrated into regular church activities. That is, handled by the minister, the board, the social action committee, other committees, and by members of the congregation as seemed appropriate. This work, of course, is not finished. Just as coming out as an individual is a lifelong process, so it is for this church. I am almost entirely comfortable being a lesbian in this congregation, obviously, as I'm confident other lesbian and gay men are. But what about people who are bisexual, transgender? This umbrella term, according to the American Psychological Association, refers to people with diverse gender identities and expressions that differ from stereotypical gender norms. It includes, but is not limited to, people who identify as male, female, transgender, gender neutral, non-binary, agender, pangender, genderqueer, two-spirit, and third gender. I don't know what all of these things are, and I think probably some of you don't too. The fluidity of our times is something I think that needs to be examined, because to some extent, the comfort of anyone here depends on the comfort of the rest of us with them. How comfortable are you with LGBTQ people, with all these diverse gender identities? Is it time for more workshops, sermons, social action, publicity, for an expansion of what we mean when we say we are a welcoming congregation? I look forward to hearing your thoughts and ideas. Blessed be.
I can't tell you how many times I loved saying woof versus walker. That made me so happy. So affirmation is hearing and seeing and feeling ourselves reflected in literature and sacred stories and in power structures and sacred spaces that we inhabit. 2 weeks ago, we had a drag story time here, led by a drag queen. The hair on the drag queen goes up, up, up. The hips on the drag queen go swish, swish, swish. And we all experienced that. This Sunday, we had the personal experience of our minister, Emerita, coming out, and this congregation coming out. And I wanted to also talk to you about my identity. I identify as she, her, and some of you have different pronouns. We've been trying to put those on our name tags, and when we introduce ourselves for the first time, it's really nice to say your pronoun, and that way it invites someone else to say, maybe they use they, or they, she, or we have an employee that uses they, he. And also, when I was very young, it was not okay in South Carolina to be anything but heterosexual. And I remember I identified as a tomboy, kind of like what Virginia said. You know, I would run around, and because I thought if I was a boy, I would have more power, more freedom. I got to climb trees and run around the woods, and I didn't get expected to wear dresses. And when the 80s hit, I loved David Bowie. I loved Prince. And I was confused because I was attracted to both boy and girl classmates. And at the time, that was confusing for me. So I made sure to really like Prince and really like David Bowie, because that was okay. And gradually, as I was a teen and a young adult, I came to understand that the term for my sexuality is bisexual. And I explored that in my young 20s and met my husband, Carl. and we are in what's called a hetero-facing marriage. And you might think that I am a heterosexual, and I am not. I am a bisexual or some other thing that I don't know yet. Because the nice thing is that what I have learned, especially from our youth, is that gender and sexuality expression is a journey. It's not a binary, and we can change and evolve as many people do. And I think what's really important is that we walk with each other, and that even that's a term that leaves people out, we are there for each other. How about we're there for each other as we explore, and in the stories that we have. And that's why it was so important to have a drag king. And I actually made a mistake because I said to him, I explained that he was a dad. And actually, he told me that he was called Mom because before he transitioned, he physically bore the children in their relationship, and then later transitioned to a male, and his kids call him Mom. I did not know that. And so that's the thing, is that we are constantly learning. 20 years later in this congregation, maybe it's time for us to look at welcoming congregation renewal. And there is a program through the UUA, and if people are interested, maybe, we looked at this about 7 years ago, and then we got busy with other things, and but maybe it's time that we look at that again. If somebody's interested in that, just tap me on the shoulder after service, and maybe we can explore that. Because we want to be a place where sacred stories are heard. We want to be a place where people feel welcomed for the first time in a sacred space, and that we show up and that we walk with one another with the kind of love that we have.